Hi, this is Danny Ryan, and welcome to the Three Wheel Podcast. Today, I'm doing a personal interview with Lane Goolsby. Lane is a senior software engineer for Three Wheel. Thank you for joining me, Lane.
Nice to be here.
And it's nice having you. We're sitting across from each other, as opposed to we've done this once before. We tried doing this over GoToMeeting, and the quality wasn't as good as we'd like it to be. So I appreciate you coming here into the office.
It's not a problem.
I appreciate you driving all the way from Columbus to come here. For folks who hopefully didn't hear the first version of this, I thought he was still living in Columbus, Georgia, but he's moved to North Carolina. Is that correct?
That's correct. I'm in Wilmington, North Carolina.
Wilmington, North Carolina. What's in Wilmington, North Carolina?
My wife is going to grad school for experimental psychology at UNCW.
How cool. She
Yeah.
enjoy it? She's in classes right now?
Yep. Actually, right now as we speak.
Really?
Yeah.
Is she enjoying it?
Yeah, she's really enjoying it.
That's awesome. That's very cool. So is it really different from living in Columbus?
It's miles apart. I'm really digging Wilmington. I really like it.
What's the biggest difference?
I guess it's far enough north that you get some of the northern influences, so you get some of the progressive attitudes and some of the really cool restaurants and the fun little shops to go and do and things to do on the weekend. But it's still southern enough that you have the southern charm and the hospitality.
How cool. Very nice. And you've been there for how long now?
3 months now.
So has everything come out of the boxes yet?
No.
Not quite
We've
yet.
got whole closets dedicated. Tetris ain't got nothing on us.
Well, I've sort of jumped into the personal. I wanted to, I guess, as a senior software engineer, what's a typical day, and for you, what's typical, or you don't, or maybe you don't have a typical day.
There's definitely no typical,
Yeah.
which is one of the things I love about Three Wheel.
Awesome.
So most of the time it's coming up with design implementations, figuring out how we're going to implement customers' desires. They'll come to us with a particular ask, and we'll figure out how we're going to go about and make that happen, what technologies we're going to use, coming up with the general structure of projects, coming up with the build and deployment patterns, making sure we actually follow patterns and practices and things like that. It's usually what I do.
Awesome. I know you've had a lot of different experiences here and have had a chance to do a lot of different types of projects. So it probably keeps you on your toes, keeps you out of trouble.
Keeps me out of trouble more than anything. Otherwise,
Excellent.
I tend to swerve off and start doing things that usually get me into trouble, either with the wife or with y'all.
Well, let's talk about. We talked a little bit about where you're living now. When you're not helping people solve their problems and outside of work, what's some of your hobbies?
So the biggest hobby that I've got is I've been working on an automated home brew system for a while. Getting in and working on the actual hardware of doing electrical engineering. So by the time it's all said and done, I'll be able to sit on my couch and brew beer over Wi-Fi. the epitome of lazy right there, but it's a really big check mark on my list of things I've wanted to do in my life.
Who inspired you to do this?
It was actually a guy named John W. I don't know what his real name is, but he did a post out on one of the popular homebrew forums of the build that he did, and I've borrowed liberally from his design.
Really?
But I've added my own little tweaks to it and things that I've done a little bit differently that I think work a little bit better. So it'll be kind of fun. It's just one of those things. Just wanted to see if I could actually figure out how the electrons flow.
Nice. How far off are you until your first batch is done?
I've been about 3 weeks away for about 9 months now.
Is work getting in the way of this?
Not so much work. Just the move obviously was a big thing.
Yeah.
Just trying to find free time to do it, and also there were some hardware aspects that I had to figure out. Some things that I thought I had understood, and when I actually put an electron flow through it, it didn't work.
It did not. It did.
No.
No,
But
so you picked up a little troubleshooting there?
Yeah, it's one thing and it's one of the most valuable lessons I've picked up out of this whole thing is when you're doing software development, it's really easy to leave a hook somewhere to come in one day 6 months down the road and add additional functionality. It's a lot more expensive to add those little side hooks when you're still dealing with hardware. That was an eye-opening kind of thing for me. It's in hindsight, it's real common sense, but now I understand why a lot of times when you look inside the hood of your car, for example, and you see a little port sitting there that's not really being used, I understand kind of why they did that, but I also understand now that probably cost them a couple 10 cents.
Mm-hmm.
But when you consider that they're building 5,000, 10,000, whatever number of cars, that starts to add up really quick.
Yeah.
So that's been really interesting. It's opened my eyes to a lot of things that I didn't necessarily think about before.
Cool. Yeah, I've guess what for favorite TV shows, movies, books. What do you like to do?
It's mostly sci-fi. Tends to be what I gravitate towards, and at least with TVs and movies. Naturally, being a geek, Star Wars and Star Trek and the whole nine yards. I spoke in the last podcast about how my wife and I were really big into Battlestar Galactica a couple years back.
Yep.
And we got a couple items that were actual set props that were part of the actual series. So we got Colonel Ty's liquor bottle, which was kind of neat. That was if you've ever seen the series, you know that his liquor bottle is a pretty predominant character throughout the entire thing.
So liquor bottle's a character. Now I'm intrigued.
It's an interesting thing. It plays a very pivotal role in the whole character dynamic.
Gets him drunk.
That's kind of his problem. Is he's a functional alcoholic. So.
Gotcha.
But that plays a really big part in his ethos.
So that was. Do you store something in it?
No, it sits in styrofoam.
Okay.
Maybe one day I'll sell it or something. I don't know. It's glass, and we have fluffy butts, and I worry about somebody knocking it off of a shelf or something like that. The other cool things that we got is we actually got some of the charcoal drawings of some of the sets, specifically the Apollo of Thor. Or the Temple of Apollo. So I don't know where I got that from.
You're making stuff up now. Yeah, I don't know if I know the difference. So that sounds intriguing.
If anybody's listening to her and they're Battlestar fans,
you're like, what?
No,
what are you thinking? What are you thinking? He's not. He's an intruder. He's not a real fan. He's not a real fan.
Poser.
And he's got our liquor glass.
But so it's kind of neat. That tends to be what I gravitate towards when it comes to just general nonfiction.
Did you read I just finished this weekend. I read The Martian. Did you read that yet?
I haven't read the book, but it was a fantastic movie. I thought it was. A lot of people foo-fooed on it, but I thought it was actually a really good sci-fi movie. There were some things that weren't quite scientifically accurate, but you can't have everything be completely accurate. But
I read sort of the backstory on that, and he had the author had started self-publishing the book, basically putting out on his website a chapter, and then started getting a following from folks. And then they people who were reading it, like, can you put a Kindle version of it out? And then when he did that, it was something where he had to charge something for it, like 99 cents. So he did like a minimum charge. And he just got a following. He had a bunch of people downloading it, really interested in it. And it just sort of took off from there. But he was a geek in that he just loved to learn about what it would take to survive on Mars, and so started really getting into trying to get into the science behind it, and trying to get into what would happen if this happened. And the movie's it's a serious comedy of errors. It's a war. He's a really smart guy who thinks out of it, but there were some things that he messed up. But it was just interesting to hear that background. How it's probably like you, driven out of the passion of going to create something and then wanting to share it with other people, which is very cool.
What I thought was really interesting about The Martian, at least the movie, when they were doing the scenes with the black hole, and they were showing how the radiation was warping around the center of the event horizon. That was scientifically accurate, and that was something they'd never done before. I forget the physicist's name, but I've seen him on several physics TV shows. He's not quite the Michio Kaku level, but he's kind of along that line. I've seen him on several Discovery shows. He was in charge of doing the science on that, and when they actually sat down and rendered it, they were all kind of surprised by what it looked like.
Oh, really?
So they actually made scientific insight in the making of a Broadway movie, or a Hollywood movie.
That's awesome. So let's talk about. I have to drill people on what phone, what's their favorite app, what phone what weapon do you choose?
I'm an Android fanboy.
Mr. Tinkerer, should I be surprised? No.
I had the original iPhone. I actually had the arguably the first smartphone. I had the Windows. What was it? It was the Windows PC. It was one of the little ones, and the screen flipped out and had a little keyboard underneath it. And I had one of those before the Apple even came out. And then I had the first gen iPhone when it first came out, and then the App Store came along, and that was just like the coolest thing ever. And I was like, man, this is awesome. And then seeing some of the lockdowns that Apple was imposing at the time kind of turned me off of Apple. Yeah. So I went back over to Android, where I started up with Android. And I've kind of been with Android for, I guess, since I started working for 3Will. It was around that time, so it's been almost 5 years.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. Favorite app at all?
Really and truly, Chrome's my favorite app. I was thinking about that answer when I gave it to you the last time.
Yeah.
For me, I don't like the idea of having to have an app in order to use a service. I think as soon as, if I go to use a service and their mobile interface is clunky or awkward, it instantly turns me off of the service in general. I just don't like the service then at that point at all. Part of it's paranoia. I come from an IT security background way back in the day, and I don't like that all these apps have to ask for all the permissions to get into my contacts list and find out what my blood type is and things like that. Yeah. So why I tend to gravitate more towards using just the mobile browser experience. You lose some fidelity, which is okay. I'm okay with losing some, and if I find that the service is reliable enough and I use it enough, I will install the app on it if I find that I'm missing key functionality. But for me, Chrome.
It's amazing how much nowadays there is a sort of the app versus the web argument, and Apple obviously going into really the direction of apps versus Google really focusing in on the web. And I understand. I use Chrome all the time on iOS, so I'm in it. Probably that's probably the app that I'm using the most of, even with using an Apple device. But cool. One last self-serving question before I let you go get back to work. And sorry, I'm slowing you down. I feel like that's sometimes my job around here. Is I just go around and slow people down. Danny, I could be billing right now. Do you really want to come ask me silly questions? Sure, I do. 3Will, you alluded a little bit earlier how you like sort of the variety of what you're doing here. Is that the main reason why you like working at 3Will, or is there something else?
I'll stick with the answer I gave you the last time I answered that question. Yeah. I like being the dumbest person in the room. Yeah. When you're sitting in a meeting with...
Except for the case right now, I can guarantee you are not the dumbest person in the room.
Not when it comes to marketing, I'll guarantee you that.
Oh, I don't know. Some days, I don't know. But thank you.
I like sitting in the room and being in a room with 3Will folks like Bo George and Kirk Lamone and Eric Bowden and everybody else in the company, and we're trying to solve a problem. And I love how we all seem to talk at levels that every other company I've ever worked at, no one ever talked at that high of a level. We always, or low of a level, depending on how you want to perceive it. Everybody always had that high level conversation of, well, we need to do the thing with the firewall, and then we need to do that with this. And here we'll actually get into very specific of not only do we need to open a firewall port, what port it is, and then what protocols need to go through it, and whether we need to have the ACKs and SIMs go through. And it's refreshing to get into those conversations. I'm using networking as probably a bad example, but when we start talking about SharePoint, we'll start talking about, well, we could do it with a workflow, or we could do it with this, or we could use some Angular, or we could do this. Well, do we need to have an app for that, or can we just use it as a sandbox, or should we use CSOM? And it gets into these really fun conversations that I love having that technical churn. Yep. That to me is what I like most about 3Will.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, we love having you here.
I like being here.
And we love that we were, with you moving up to North Carolina, I'm glad to hear everything's working out. We're working remotely. It's working out great. We would so miss you. So I'm so glad that we're able to work things out there. And you probably can get much more done than anybody else because you're not around the office here for me to bother. You can just ignore me on IM. But thank you so much for for the years of hard work that you put in, and for making such a big difference on projects. You just step right in all the time and are hands up in the air, ready to help out however you can, and we appreciate that.
I try to be.
Cool. Very cool. Well, thanks everybody for taking the time to listen today, and have a great day. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.